Hello there and you're very welcome to the programme. Well, it's 16 years since the compulsory national car test came into force in Ireland. Many motorists see the NCT as a form of guarantee of roadworthiness, a reassurance that your car is safe to drive and free from any serious defects. Well, tonight the RTE Investigations Unit can reveal there are flaws in the test system which may allow dangerous cars past the NCT. Paul Murphy has this report.
Tonight we examine our national car test, the NCT. We reveal how the testing standards laid out in legislation are allowing some cars past the test, even though they may be dangerous to drive. Since the NCT was introduced 16 years ago, the quality of the cars on our roads has improved substantially. The legislation for the test is based on an EU roadworthiness directive. Until it was recently changed, the NCT's website had for years stated that the NCT tests the roadworthiness of motor vehicles and identifies any defects, such as faulty brakes, suspension and rusty bodywork. But what does the NCT mean to the motoring public?
My expectation is that the car is sound, mechanically and safe. That's it.
I expect that once I'm finished the test, that the car that I have is safe to drive, that nothing unexpected is going to happen. I won't be driving down the road and a wheel will fall off or anything like that.
The certificate is supposed to say that it's meeting a minimum safety requirement, but I'd like to think that it's a little bit more than that. I'd like to think that I'd be happy to drive my car for a long time and not have to worry about it.
Well, I gather it's roadworthy and it's not for the next year, 3 years. I'm happy enough.
Despite a perception that the NCT certifies a car's safety and roadworthiness, the Road Safety Authority, which supervises the test, says there are no guarantees once a car leaves the test centre.
It's a check at a moment in time on a range of safety critical items set out by the EU. That is all it is. It is not a service, it's not a guarantee. It is a minimum check of the vehicle condition at that time, and it can only check what is actually visible to the inspector.
Faulty brakes, rusty bodywork and defective shock absorbers are all potential contributors to death and injury on Irish roads. Take shock absorbers for example. They are part of a vehicle's suspension and are crucial for car safety because they help to keep your tyres in contact with the road when driving over uneven surfaces and when cornering.
This is an hydraulic damper or a shock absorber. What it does is it provides resistance to it assists the spring absorber when they bumps on the road, absorbing the energy. This one has the oil removed, it's a hydraulic shock absorber, and there's no resistance whatsoever. As you can see, that will provide no resistance to a car. So that car would bounce continuously. So one way to test this at home would be, if you have a faulty suspension, is bounce the car once. The car should come back and remain stationary. Actually, this car continues to oscillate. Both sides have been removed, so it's equally gone on both sides.
This footage shows the performance of a car after the oil has been removed entirely from the shock absorbers and they are no longer functioning. During an NCT, shock absorbers are checked visually for oil leaks. They are also tested on a machine which checks for balance across the axle. In the balance test, the left and right wheels are moved up and down. If the difference between the movement of the left wheel and the movement of the right wheel is greater than 30%, the car fails the test. The machine gives readings in mahometers, which are virtually the same as millimetres, and measure the movements of a car suspension. The higher the readings, the bouncier the car will be. There is no agreed method to evaluate suspension test results, but experts we spoke to say readings above 80 mahometers are a clear cause for concern.
Anything over 80 I think should be looked at. If it goes beyond that, then I think the questions have to be asked as to the effectiveness of the shock absorber in the system.
Yet cars routinely pass the NCT with readings over 80. This car passed with readings on one wheel of 178 mahometers and the other of 159, but because the difference was less than 30%, it passed.
I would expect it's a bit like driving on a bog road. The back of the car is bouncing up and down as you travel along ordinary roads. And if you get to any speed, then it's bound to be dangerous.
Paula Murphy lost her daughter Amanda in a car accident 3 years ago. She was 26 years old.
She was coming back from Middleton when the accident happened. When she was turning off on the right, and the other person in the Jeep came down the hill, and she just lost complete control of the car. The car was in smithereens. It was 20 to 6 when the phone rang. There was a crash, and that Amanda was critical, you know. Then I just went numb. Sorry. I went to the hospital. There was many people there. I just asked the reception room, where was she? And when I went there was ambulance people and fire brigade people, and the guards were there, and then the doctors called me to the room. And of course, they told me straight off, they said, she's dead. And I was screaming.
The Mazda 121 that Amanda was driving at the time of the accident was 17 years old. When she bought the car 6 months earlier, it had just passed its NCT. She clocked up nearly 1,300 miles between the test and the accident. There is no way of telling exactly what caused the accident on that day. In a statement to the Gardaí, which was subsequently presented in evidence at the inquest, the driver of the other car, who was entirely blameless, said Amanda's car had suddenly and without warning shot sideways across the white line onto my side of the road directly in front of me.
The other driver saw Amanda approach, thought her driving was perfect, didn't see any issue until about 30 or 35 metres in front of him, Amanda's car just went out of control.
The inquest also included evidence from a Garda vehicle inspector who stated that Amanda's car was not in a roadworthy condition prior to the collision because the two rear shock absorbers were leaking an excessive amount of oil, thus making the vehicle very unstable before and during cornering. When Amanda's car was NCT'd 7 months before her accident, her suspension test results showed readings of 96 millimetres and 94. So what would those readings mean?
It means that the suspension isn't keeping the wheels in contact with the floor. It means that the wheels are becoming partially airborne over normal road inputs.
If you had a car that had a millimetre reading of 94 or 96, what would you do?
I'd change the shock absorbers. I wouldn't drive it anymore. I'd change the shock absorbers. Their importance for the performance of the suspension can't really be overstated. I certainly wouldn't want my wife driving the car, and I wouldn't drive it because no amount of skill can compensate for the fact that the wheels aren't touching the floor.
I would definitely be replacing those shock absorbers straight away. There wouldn't be any delay in that.
Why?
For my safety, driving the car, and for the safety of other road users. So this is not a go away, fix it and come back one. This is a leave the car, get the car towed away.
Both rear suspensions were completely defective. And that was actually present on the day the car rolled off the test lane in the test centre.
In an email, the RSA said that at the time of the test, there was no evidence of fluid leakage presented, and it is of the view that the car was not defective at the time of the NCT, and that readings of 94 millimetres and 96 are not sufficient as a basis to establish the roadworthiness of a car. In a separate statement, NCT operator Apples said, "We can confirm that those readings taken from the Mazda 121 would pass the NCT suspension imbalance test. On this information alone, they are not defective under the National Car Test regulations." When Amanda's car was tested, the NCT website stated that the test identifies any defects, such as faulty suspension. But our investigation found that a car may pass even if its shock absorbers, so crucial to the suspension, are all defective, as long as they are similarly defective.
Is it possible for a car to pass the NCT if all 4 shock absorbers are completely deficient?
I can't say. It depends on what else is deficient within that area of the vehicle. But if the imbalance is under 30%, the car will pass. And if there's no evidence of any other damage in that suspension, it will pass.
John Sherry is a veteran mechanic who worked as an NCT inspector for over 11 years.
If you had a vehicle in and you put it on the suspension test, and it was obvious from the suspension test that the shock absorbers were blown, You'd know that by the feeling in the car, even by driving the car, you'd know that. And when you put it on the suspension test, you found that there was no imbalance on it. You put it up on the ramp then, and you found that there was no sign of a leak, there was no sign of damage. You had no option but to pass that car. The equipment had passed it.
The Road Safety Authority, an outside consultant hired by the RSA called the Transport Research Laboratory, and NCT operator Applis, state that the test for Paula's daughter's car was carried out by Applis in accordance with the guidance provided by EU directives.
We are completely satisfied that there was nothing defective with the NCT test. The test was done correctly. If it went through any other jurisdiction in Europe, the same result would come out.
Is it good enough to say that the car would pass a test in any other European jurisdiction? Is that good enough, or should you be looking at a way to...
We are, as I said, we are actually looking at the suspension test with the other member states. It is a very complex algorithm to come up with based on all the different variables, tyres, pressure, air, springs. We do more than the other EU states. As I said, we're only one of 5 nations that are doing any kind of imbalance test. We go over and above the minimum requirement.
The question is not necessarily much whether it's a problem with the way we're testing as to the fail criteria that have been set. At the moment, all we're testing for is imbalance. Left and right, are they the same or similar? We're not actually testing for the performance of the shock absorber itself.
Another area of NCT contention is corrosion. Over 20,000 cars failed in NCT due to corrosion last year, but car owners deliberately masking holes with filler allows some cars to get through. This car too was tested in accordance with the NCT manual and passed because it appears that at the time of the test, the rusty bodywork had been covered up with filler. It was then sold to an unsuspecting buyer. After the test, the filler began to fall out.
In fact, if you look through here, you can actually see into the car. The problem is that the structural integrity of that floor is gone. If the car had an impact to the front or the side in this area, it would completely crush. There's no integrity there.
If it's not visible to the inspector, or if it has been covered up with a good underbody sealant, you will be able to cheat the NCT. We are not permitted to damage the car during an NCT. And unfortunately, people will try and mask corrosion with a very good polish up and isopon. It is an area of concern.
This car too passed an NCT a couple of weeks before its wheel caved in from corrosion.
I was on the way up to Tipperary fishing, doing a bit of fishing with my dad and my 2 brothers. And on the way home, I took the slip road off the toll road by Fermoy and smelt a bit of burn off the car. I stopped the car, got out, had a look around, and when I kind of stood back, I looked at the back of the car and I seen the wheel. It was actually after caving in. So I put my hand in, I felt it, I kind of looked up underneath it, I seen a hole. There was a hole at least that thick, like rust, just gone out of the car. It just caved in.
And what was the gap between passing the NCT and your accident?
About a week and a half to 2 weeks. No longer than 2 weeks.
Scott Crean retained Liam Cotter to write a report on the car. Mr. Cotter took us through the damage he found.
As you can clearly see, very extensive corrosion. The metal has completely corroded away. If you look at the back of the other side, you'll see that the thickness of the metal is approximately 3 or 4 millimeters, whereas here it's actually paper thin. You can actually bend it with your fingers. The structural strength of that particular component has been completely compromised by the amount of corrosion.
So when that goes, what happens to the wheels?
Well, as you can see in this particular case, the axle collapsed and the wheel fell in against the top of the shock. And if you look up here, you can see where the tyre was actually rubbing against the shock absorber. In extreme cases, the wheel could potentially detach from the vehicle while driving.
In a letter to Scott Crean, Apples, the company contracted to operate the national car test for the RSA, said, "The tester has stated that he is adamant there were no holes or obvious corrosion visible from underneath the vehicle on the day of the inspection, and that it was the NCT Centre manager's professional opinion that the hole only became visible when the main structure gave way."
You can only go a certain extent in terms of non-destructive testing. We can't damage an owner's vehicle, but what we have done is issue better equipment such as small hammers to check out that area.
Aside from issues with the NCT system highlighted, there are also considerable inconsistencies between some of the 47 test centres around Ireland, where pass rates can differ dramatically from centre to centre. In 2011, for example, 70% of vehicles passed at the Carrickfinn NCT centre, while in Clifton, another small town on the western seaboard, it was 40%. In 2012, 67% passed at Carrickfinn, but only 39% in Carrick-on-Shannon. In 2013, 55% passed at Tralee, but only 36% at Clifton. And in 2014, 58% of vehicles passed at the Kilkenny NCT centre, but only 35% at Clifton.
The objective isn't to come out with a consistent pass-fail rate. What we are aiming to get is a consistent quality of test. And pass and fail rates are very much determined by the age of the vehicle, the profile of the road network in and around the centre, the average miles done in each one of the regions that a test centre is in.
In Northern Ireland, there is a much narrower gap between pass rates at its 15 test centres. In 2014, Belfast had the highest pass rate at 85% and Cookstown the lowest at 78%. In 2013, the highest pass rate was 84% in Belfast and the lowest 77% in Cookstown. Again in 2012, the difference between the highest and lowest pass rates in the north was just 7%, compared to as much as 30% in the 26 counties.
It can be a question of motorists' attitude to preventative maintenance, and some people may not take preventative maintenance measures in this jurisdiction compared to the north.
Some car mechanics say it can be difficult to predict what will pass or fail in NCT. Garage owner Alan Watkins says many of his customers see the NCT as a safety inspection. He tells of one motorist who recently brought her car for a pre-NCT check.
When I did a pre-NCT, I told the customer that the brakes and suspension were quite dangerous. Because it was an older car, she decided she wanted to see what the NCT said in case it failed on more, and then she mightn't put the money into it and scrap the car.
The NCT failed the car on corrosion and a couple of minor items, but raised no concerns over the suspension or the brakes or a missing wing mirror.
She rang me to say that it didn't fail on the brakes or the suspension or a couple of other bits, so I was quite shocked. I don't know whether she thought I was trying to rip her off with putting parts in that they need to be put in. So I got the car back in to do the repair and I showed her the issue, and then when she saw the problem we repaired the car. I've replaced the brake disc as you'll be able to see here. The brake disc is brand new. This is what was removed from the car. As you can see, the difference is this is the contact patch here.
This is how a brake typically works. The brake pads grip the brake disc in an area called the contact patch, the shiny piece on the disc. If the contact patch is seriously reduced, there can be significant safety implications.
With repeated application of the brake, maybe in traffic, maybe going down a hill, then it's likely that the brake disc will become hotter and hotter. Glazing might occur on the pad surface, and as a result of that, when you really need the brake to work, it won't perform as it should, and the pad will slide across the surface of the disc rather than bite into it.
This brake disc passed the NCT, however it would not pass the test for commercial vehicles. This training document for inspectors for the light commercial vehicle test shows a brake disc with poor contact with brake pads and labels it unacceptable because it indicates a reduction in stopping power due to brake fade. Such a brake disc on a Ford Focus van, a commercial vehicle, would fail on safety grounds, but on the same size and model of a Ford Focus car, it would pass. NCT operator Apples, however, told the investigations unit that the brake disc was not a fail item in the NCT because the vehicle was still able to produce a very good brake performance on the brake test machine. Apples also said that brake fade is caused by a build-up of heat due to prolonged braking and is really only relevant in large goods vehicles and large vans that are under full load. Brake fade would not be particularly relevant to a car, as the same issues of heat build-up are not applicable.
If it fails in one, presumably it should fail in the other. In my mind, neither should pass. They're both evidence of something that is severely wrong in the braking system.
When Michael and Elaine O'Donovan bought a BMW from a Kildare car dealer, they were reassured by the fact that 4 weeks earlier it had passed its NCT.
It looked a stunning car from the pictures and everything. We took it for a drive and everything. It drove perfectly and everything, and there was an NCT on it, a fresh NCT on it.
About 3 weeks after buying the car, Michael heard a knocking noise. He called in an auto engineer who found severely corroded brake lines, an engine so awash with oil it was difficult to pinpoint the leaks, and more.
The right-hand side of the vehicle was slightly shorter than the left-hand side of the vehicle, and as a result of that, the suspension was not lying where it should be in the vehicle. The airbag light had been disconnected. The bulb itself had been removed from the dash.
Like the oil leaks, the corroded brake lines and the badly repaired chassis, the failure of the airbag light upon ignition should be an NCT fail.
People buy cars based on the fact that they have NCTs, thinking that they're roadworthy and safe to drive, and this vehicle was not.
I trusted it, so I thought the NCT would have covered everything. So if there was any fault, they would have seen it. So at the time, I was 100% if it passes the NCT, the car is okay.
The NCT, however, doesn't claim to cover everything. It claims to be a basic vehicle inspection at a particular moment in time.
Are there any glaring holes at the minute?
Absolutely not. We firmly believe, and that has been found in terms of Ireland's performance in the EU, that our test is probably the most sophisticated in the member states involved in the road safety strategy.
That was Paul Murphy of the RTE Investigations Unit reporting. Now, day 55.